National Super Alliance is planning yet another wave of demonstrations from next week. This part of the opposition's plan to push for another election.
We will continue to assemble, demonstrate, to picket, and to present petition to public authorities as often as we choose.
The coalition insisting it does not recognize Kenyatta's victory in the fresh election held on the 26th of October. NASA CEO Norman Magaya says the new wave of protest will be well planned and executed to avoid confrontations and violence that has led to loss of lives and destruction of businesses.
As we speak now, training is ongoing for protest marshals. We have retained services from civil organizations on peaceful assemblies and protests, who we intend to ensure that they guide our people accordingly. So you're going to see largely huge crowds of protesters, but very peaceful.
A strategy that has been dismissed by Jubilee.
So if you imagine that you can use violence as a means to political power, the same violence shall consume you.
There is a creeping culture of violence in the political process that we all must be aware of.
And by the end of this week, NASA is expected to release a list of products and shops to be boycotted by supporters for allegedly associating themselves with the Jubilee government.
It will be objective, and we will show the links that each of these business entities have had either in compromising our quest for a free and fair election or how they are facilitating this dictatorship. So it's not going to be arbitrary.
There are 40 million Kenyans who will sustain your enterprise. We have overrated some people in this country. It's time we call it their bluff.
Businesses that display the president's portrait are also on NASA's crosshairs. Although it is not mandatory to display the president's image in a business premise, many traders do so in what some have interpreted as a show of patriotism.
Any business entity that has that portrait, you avoid it as part of the tools of resistance.
The CEO reiterating NASA leaders' stand that they would not challenge Kenyatta's victory at the Supreme Court. President Kenyatta, as well as observers, have urged anyone dissatisfied with the election outcome to seek remedy in court.
And whoever is going should not be seen to be a proxy of NASA. I can speak as the Chief Executive Officer of NASA. We have no intention to retain a proxy. I think we have demonstrated the immense ability to pursue matters in court in our own name where we believe it's the right thing to do.
Jubilee leaders have, however, dismissed NASA's call.
In fact, in 1997, he did say that fresh elections must be held within 21 days. Well, it came to pass, those 21 days passed and no election was held. In 2007, it was exactly the same script. In 2013 is the only time that he didn't come up with that script.
NASA strategists are already meeting to plan the activities of its resistance movement. It plans to establish a task force in the People's Assembly in a majority of the county assemblies by the end of November.
Yes, that's a story we want to discuss right now with my panelists this morning. Let me mention them again. Rosa Buyu, woman representative, Kisumu County, the only lady on the panel. That's why I started with you. Ababu Namwamba, former MP Budalangi, James Nikal, MP Seme, and Karanja Kabagi, an advocate and also a member of the Jubilee Party, because we need to be clear which side you speak for. We have this tendency to call people on our panels political analysts, and we've been challenged on that fact because you speak for one side of the political, but you also speak as an advocate to the High Court, so I'll give you that, sir. Back to the streets, starting Monday. We do have members of NASA here, and Monday is also the deadline when the deadline for any petition challenging the election of President Uhuru Kenyatta, challenging the results of the repeat presidential election. Why is NASA not going to court?
What NASA unveiled in the press statement that was made by the coalition leader gave broad guidelines of what is going to happen. We must look at it from the very beginning of the process. The election that took place on 8th of August. there were issues that were raised at that time by NASA. NASA was told, as being told now, go to court. The court found that the issues that were being raised were pertinent. It said, go to another election in a way that is in line with the law and the constitution. Anybody will know that what that means is that the issues that were a problem needed to be addressed before you went into the new election. Now, that really were not addressed. NASA raised the issues, brought what we call the reducible minimum, which would have been a basis for discussion on how we should go into the next election. That were totally ignored. There were indications all through the process into the rerun that there are problems. It reached a point that the commissioners themselves started saying this thing is not going to get a credible result. One of them actually walked away. The chairman himself came out very close to the election 26 and said, I don't think I'll be able to deliver a credible election. Now, we then proceed to get into that election in that background. I think that anybody who is expecting that that election goes through and it comes out and that those issues were not addressed and the people who actually expressed concern, their concerns were not addressed, that they will just peacefully say, yes, it has happened, the election has now taken place and we now accept it and we go on. It would then be really hypocritical if you accept that process while the outcome of that process, while you had actually raised doubts with it. So logically,
Dr. Nikal, the court ordered this. Do you think that even the problems that NASA had with this repeat presidential poll, that the best way to actually address them is go back to court and say there were problems, you ordered this, it wasn't done, now we're back?
Well, who was to do that? That it can't be left to NASA that every time there's a problem within an institution, NASA has to go back to court, or any organization has to go back to court. What are the responsibilities of the people who are managing that institution once it has been brought to their attention, including a statement by the court, go and do it properly? That they expect you that again you go back to court, the court told you and you are not doing. It was expressed, the NASA expressed all through before the 26th that we need to sit down, have a dialogue on the process of the election. Then the issue of dialogue was then demonized, that NASA was merely asking for a nusumkati, which in itself actually, in my view, was abusive and basically ignored what NASA was saying. Okay. So with that, NASA really cannot accept the results of this election and say it is over and we accept that the president has been elected. We think that there is still, NASA believes there is still need to have a proper election.
Bwana Karanja Kabage, speaking as a lawyer, when a court orders something, then you feel that the order was not followed the way the court ordered, the best remedy would be go back to court, don't you think?
Well, thank you. I think we have heard a lot about the so-called irreducible minimum. But let's talk about irreducible truth. And this is the following. One, when the court made determination on the 1st of September that election must be repeated as per Article 140 of the Constitution, it was incumbent upon all the parties to abide by that. However, NASA contemptuously refused to obey the court order. And this is something people are not even talking about. NASA did not campaign against Jubilee. It was campaigning against the court order, which was issued by the Supreme Court. Go and conduct the elections. All right? And what did the court say? Conduct it according to the Constitution and the laws of the land. All right? You cannot, you as a player, make determination that this body is not going to conduct the election according to the Constitution and the laws of the land before the elections have been held. It is incumbent upon you to point out what is it that the IBC is not complying with as far as the court order is concerned. I want to refer you to page 386 of the Constitution. I want to paraphrase it, of the ruling of the Supreme Court. That's Maraga 4, because there were 3 rulings. It said that in their findings, they did not find either the commissioners or the staff of the IBC to have committed either any illegality or irregularity. That is their findings. What the finding of the Supreme Court said is that they found systemic problems with the IBC. But what happens to the issue of the so-called reduce or minimum? Fire this person, fire that person, do this, do that. The court never gave order to that effect. In fact, the court order rubbished the claim by the IBC, by the petitioner, that they are members of the staff of the IBC and the commissioners did the ABCD. In fact, they were exonerated.
Okay.
That is the first thing that I want to talk about as irreducible truth. The second irreducible truth is the following. When the NASA says that the election should be held within 90 days, that is a figmentation of imagination. Why? Because they were referring to Raila case of 2013, where the judge or the judgment under what we call obiter dictum, that is an opinion of the court, first of all made a reference to Article 138 1B. It doesn't exist in the Constitution. So when you start hearing people talking about we must have election within 90 days, it doesn't exist. It's a creature of imagination. It doesn't exist anywhere in the Constitution. For me, what would have been the best thing is go ahead, obey the Supreme Court order, let the election be held, participate, and then we have an avenue of saying, I will go to court and demonstrate.
Are you saying that NASA, by failing to take part in this election or by withdrawing their candidate from this election, now they find themselves in a position where they do not have a right to go back to court to complain about
They don't even have a right. Even I'm surprised somebody saying that they don't want to go to court. Even if you went to court today, let me tell you, and I want to say this, and I've seen in another forum, judges are not robots. First, you demonize the process of election. You mount a campaign of boycotting, and not only boycotting or even calling for boycotting, instigating perpetration of violence in various places, and the election are not held. Then you say they are not legitimate. Please, let me tell you something. The word legitimacy is being misused here. Legitimacy basically says lawful. It is lawful. What IBC did was totally lawful. And let me say the other irreducible truth. And this is the following. When NASA leadership made determination that they were going to boycott the elections, right? Akombe, whom they are now using to placate their argument, and even the statement by the chairman of Fula Chapkati, they had not issued that statement. And I want you to refer to the first press conference that was issued post 20th of September. Raila Odinga and James Orengo, what did they say about the election? Anybody should see that. There was a deliberate and a very conscious effort of not having the election. The last irreducible truth is this. Harun Dubi, when he went to court on the 25th of last month, what did he do? One of the things he said as part of the petition why there should not be election is that he quoted this fictitious Article 138 1B that says that we must have elections within 90 days. Now, this is a narrative that is composed of untruth and being made to believe that is the truth. That's a fact.
Rosa Boy, when NASA and Raila Odinga as a candidate went to court prior to the ruling of September 1st, the court actually made a judgment that appeared to favor you. Because they nullified the election of August the 8th and ordered a repeat. And I remember those celebrations. What changed? What changed that now NASA says they cannot go to court to challenge this same process that was ordered by the court? Why opt for other means when there is this rather obvious option of going back to the Supreme Court and saying, yes, there were all these problems, you ordered a repeat, but we could not take part in that because of this and the other. Why the change now?
First of all, I have to declare that I'm not a lawyer. So I'm not going to go into the details of, but I'm going to speak like a normal, ordinary Kenyan. NASA or the NASA Brigade believes in the rule of law. Even before this new constitution was promulgated in 2010, majority of the NASA Brigade took part and actively campaigned for the constitution. And if you want to see, if you want to check, if you care to check, on the other side, you will find many of the people who campaigned against that constitution sitting as part of the leadership of Jubilee. In 2013, NASA went to court because it believed in the rule of law. And despite the fact that it did not agree with the outcome of the court, NASA chose to obey the outcome and actually wished the other side well. In the just concluded election of August 8th, when NASA went to court, it went to court again because it believed in the rule of law. And what the Supreme Court clearly stipulated was that elections was to be held in 60 days according to the Constitution and the law of the land, like it says, because it had picked out a lot of irregularities and illegalities. NASA, as a responsible part of the citizenry, outlined what it thought that were part of those irregularities and illegalities, which it thought should be addressed. And it called it irreducible minimum to make the next election highly regular and highly legal according to the Constitution and law of the land. When that did not happen, despite the fact that the court had found that there were irregularities and illegalities, NASA chose not to take part in an election that was otherwise going to go against the ruling of the Supreme Court. Why? Because irregularities and illegalities that had been pointed out were still going to be carried on to the next election. Then doesn't it make sense that now that the 60 days are over, they expired in two days ago, that you now go back to court and say that did not happen? So now NASA is faced with fighting impunity. We went to court, and the first impunity that was even witnessed during the court proceedings was, can we have the servers open? And that was a directive not from NASA, but from the court. And there was impunity right there. IEBC chose not to comply. Now again, in carrying out the new or the fresh elections, we saw impunity again, because no irregularities, or what NASA considered to be regularities and illegalities, were still not addressed. What I would have expected IEBC to do was look at those irreducible minimum that NASA had presented. And if Jubilee was also interested in having a free, fair, and credible election, they would have also come up with what they thought would make the next election free, fair, and credible. And then IEBC, as the body charged, independent body charged with carrying out the election, should have looked at what was possible to do and what was not possible to do, so that we'd have all moved on as a people. Now that that didn't happen, and through impunity, IEBC went on to carry an election that only 38% of Kenyans participated in. NASA is faced with fighting this impunity and goes back to the Constitution And what NASA now recognizes is the sovereignty of the people of Kenya, which is enshrined in the Constitution.
Are you saying that NASA 60 days later no longer has faith in the courts?
What I'm saying is NASA has gone to court, and NASA is now going back to the people of Kenya, who are the owners of this country and who are the owners of who the Constitution has given that power. Okay. So that is why NASA is now going back to the people and saying the power has been given to the people in our Constitution. Let the people now decide and channel this process. Since IBC, that was actually mandated, I can see Ababu yawning and stretching. And Ababu, you'd better yawn and stretch.
Well, coming to you, Ababu.
No.
Tell me now, in your own understanding, why is NASA insistent on not returning to court? Because it's a bit baffling. Because
it should not be baffling.
The court ruled 60 days ago, 62 days ago, that ruling went, was something you celebrated. 60 days later, you're not willing to go back.
No, don't say we are not willing. You saw all the things that NASA did to make those 60 days possible and to make it possible according to the ruling of the Supreme Court.
Why do you think NASA is reluctant to return to court?
You know, I think it was Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propagandist in chief, who once said that a lie told often enough, repeatedly, starts sounding like the truth. And Winston Churchill would later add that a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has time to even pull on its pants. You know, NASA has told a lie so often that they have come to believe their lie.
Which is the lie about?
And the lie is that they are always right and everyone else is always wrong. And that they have this thing called the people. And that it's only NASA that has people. So when NASA talks about people power, they imagine in their heads that it's only NASA or Raila Odinga that has people. That Uhuru Kenyatta or the Jubilee leadership does not have people. That is a lie that NASA really needs to get over. But the point we need to emphasize here, that the beauty of a constitutional democracy such as ours is that it introduces a level of certainty, so that instead of arguing round and round in circles and attempting to resolve issues on the basis of individual whim or a personal opinion, we can actually go to the Constitution and it will introduce absolute certainty. Article 140, Sub-Article 3 of the Constitution, in clear and ambiguous terms says, and I quote, if the Supreme Court determines the election of the president-elect to be invalid, a fresh election shall be held within 60 days after the determination. As a lawyer, as an officer of the court, I know the meaning or the implication when the law uses terminologies like may and when it says shall. The term used in Article 143 is the clear and ambiguous, unarguable shall. And therefore, when discussing this whole matter of this election that we have just come from, the measure of legality, legitimacy, and any other term you may want to throw in the mix is the Constitution. Absolutely, the Constitution. And therefore, we may want to ask a number of questions. Did the highest court in this land return a determination and order an election in the terms of Article 143? The answer is yes. Did that order of the court place a responsibility on the IEBC to conduct that election in these terms of the Constitution? The answer is yes. Did the IEBC proceed to execute that constitutional mandate as ordered by the Supreme Court? The answer is yes. And finally,
I'll respond to that.
I'll give you.
You see, the problem of the culture of heckling You heckle even on national TV.
There's no heckling.
So I would appreciate if my dear sister, that I'm very proud of, I'm very proud of this girl seated to my right here, if she just gave me an opportunity to execute my point like she did hers so lucidly and passionately. Now, in terms of determining whether President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta was properly and validly elected and declared president, again, the answer lies in the Constitution. Did he subject himself to this election? Yes. Did he meet the constitutional threshold of number 1, scoring at the very least 50% plus 1 vote? Yes, in fact, he scored 98% of the votes cast. Did he meet the threshold of 25% in at least a half of the 47 counties? Yes, in fact, he met that threshold in 45 counties out of the 47 of all the votes cast. So in terms of the law, the Constitution, the procedures, the regulations, the election we have just come from on October 26th was constitutional. It is legal. And on this matter of numbers, because NASA is banding around numbers, you need to know that 92% of the voters who elected Uhuru Kenyatta on 8th of August turned up to reassert their faith in him on the 26th of October. Let me just conclude. I want to conclude.
We need to go on a break.
I want to conclude even as we go on a break.
Briefly about
that at the end of the day,
issues, I would like to make
at the end of the day, we must return this subject, we must return this debate to the Constitution, to the law. We are not some mobocracy, because you see, what NASA is attempting is to move Kenya from a democracy to a mobocracy, where we don't play by any known rules, we play by some crazy rules like
the deadline to file a petition against the results of the repeat presidential election lapses on Monday next week. The Supreme Court will have 14 days to determine that any petition that will be filed, that will be on the 20th. Once the Supreme Court makes a determination, whichever way that goes, that is the only way provided for in the Constitution, and as far as validating or invalidating a presidential election. What will happen to NASA after that? That after the break.